Hello! If you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll know that I have a lot of art supplies in my studio, and today I'm going to use some of them to make some art. What a novel concept! But let's get into it, shall we? For my first painting, I'm going to use my Schmincke Horadam watercolour set that I have in this tin. They're all individual tubes that I've picked out over time, and I've turned into one giant palette here. And for my surface, I have some Canson Moulin du Roi paper here, a large sheet of it which I've already cut out. And for my painting, I had a piece left over from another project, so I'm using that today. And for some reason, I mimed cutting out the paper there. I'm using one of many Blackwing pencils in my stash. I really like drawing with these. I have numerous boxes of them, and I'm trying to work through some of my pencils. But now for the actual drawing. I found this reference photo in the Facebook artist group, Free Reference Photos for Artists, and I just think it is hilarious. Look at the hare's little tooth. I just think it's so adorable, and I really just had to paint this, but of course I've got to draw it first. And I tried to freehand it. It actually turned out pretty well, although gosh, the proportions of its head are so confusing. It's got a really square-shaped skull, and it took me a few goes to get it right. Getting the drawing part right is the most important part of an artwork, because if the foundation is wrong, then the rest of the painting's just going to look a whole mess. I decided I wanted to add some inky line art to it, so I'm using a fountain pen here with some permanent black ink so it's waterproof and won't wash off later when I'm getting to the watercolours. I also taped down the edges with some pineapple washi tape. This was sent to me as a gift from the Alchemist art store, and I've actually seen it in a few other places online. It must be a really popular design at the moment. But I'm just drawing some really thin lines over everything because I don't want it to be too heavily dominant of an outline, but I do want to have it included in the painting. And that's what I'm up to now. I started with a water wash on the background, and I'm just adding in some really blurry colours because I don't want my background to be very dominant. I just want it to be fading into the background. It's on a field of grass, and I always like to splash in some splotches of paint just to make the background a little bit more interesting. You will see how it dissipates into that cotton paper, and it's just such a pretty effect. And of course, once the paint dries, it will shift to a much lighter tone, and sometimes I will go over it again to make it darker, but this time I just left it as it is because I really want my focus to be on the hair and also these few blades of grass or wheat or whatever it is it's eating. I actually painted this picture last year in 2022, originally for a different video which didn't end up panning out, but I kept the footage and thought it would be fun to share this in a future video, and now the future is here. I also just want to paint sometimes for the sake of painting, not specifically for a video, and so I'm thinking this is probably going to be a casual series for whenever I decide to just do an art for whatever reason, usually when I'm inspired by something specific. Quite often I will film it and just keep the footage for a future time, so I think it would be nice to have a series of me just painting pictures or drawing or doing whatever. Not everything I do is for YouTube, although I find that YouTube does take a significant proportion of my life sometimes, and I feel like I should be making all of my art for YouTube videos, which is a little bit frustrating. Sometimes I just want to make art for me. So I do make things that I don't film, but then other times I like to film something, and I think it would be fun just to put those videos together to make an artwork video. After all, I am an artist with an art channel. I had a lot of fun painting this. Because I was so inspired by the picture, it was just a real pleasure drawing it out and then choosing which watercolour paints I was going to use. I hadn't used my Schmincke palette for a while, and I thought that the colours in it would be really good for this particular painting. I'm using a whole bunch of different brushes here. The one I'm currently using is an Isabey brush, which is pure Sable. It's one of my absolute favourite brushes. This was also a gift from the Alchemist art store, and I've used this one so much since then. It holds a lot of water and paint, but it's also really precise, and it's got so much versatility in it. The black brush I was using at the beginning to paint in the background is a Tintoretto Quill, I think. I picked that up in a marketplace, and it's actually a really good brush. I've also got some Princeton Elite brushes in there, and also that brown one is a Princeton Neptune. They make some really good brushes, and I'm very happy with the quality of those. I tend to just use whatever brush is nearest to me at the time, but I do have my favourites, and I think this Isabey brush is at the top of the list right now. So I worked on this hair in layers, building up the colour, and adding in texture as I went along. I'm so happy with how this painting turned out. It's so cute, and it's just such an absurd looking expression on its face. It makes me smile every time I see it. That's one artwork done. Let's see what else I can use. For my next picture, I decided to do something in coloured pencils, and I'm going for my Caran Luminance set. It's all 100 pencils, and they are probably the most used pencils I have in my collection. You can see they're all different sizes, no longer perfect, but I really love this set of pencils. They are absolutely gorgeous. They are worth the money, really expensive, but such a great quality. That little stumpy black at the bottom there. I was looking around for some paper to use, and I found my box of Zeta Florence A4 writing paper, which I picked up last year, and I've only used maybe one piece of it, so I thought I'd try some of this out. It's quite thin paper, but it actually has a really decent tooth on it. Can you see that texture in the paper? And I thought it might go quite nicely for these coloured pencils. I just like to experiment on different types of paper to see what works best. It's also got some cotton. I completely forgot to mention that I also used Caran Neo Colour 1 crayons for the background. And here's the reference photo I'm using, these flowers that were beautifully lit up on a black background. And I knew it would just take forever to do the background with coloured pencils, so I went for the crayons because they work much more quickly, they cover a lot of area and save a lot of time. I'm using Zest It pencil blend because it's a solvent to blend out these crayons. The Neo Colour ones are not water soluble, so you do need to use a solvent like Gamsol or Zest It. But wow, they blend out so well in this solvent, and I was actually amazed at how well they did. It's the first time I've ever done this, and I'm using just a cotton bud to blend it out. Look how easily they blur together. So I started off with a blue background, but I actually want it to be black, so I'm going over everything with the black crayon. It's nice to start out with a colour underneath though, because it adds a richness to the black, which you cannot get with just the black alone. It looks so patchy because the paper is quite toothy, and so there was a lot of blue showing underneath, but once I got that solvent on there, it blended out perfectly, and now everything is just this gorgeous dark background, which is exactly what I wanted. I probably could have done a third layer, but I decided 2 layers was enough. I really wanted to get on with the coloured pencil drawing. The other way I guess you could do it is to start with black paper and then just add the highlights, but I really wanted my flower to be super bright, with that light reflecting through the petals, so I thought it would be better to be on a white paper, and it ended up being the right choice. For this picture I actually printed out the reference photo and then traced the outline onto the paper, because I tried drawing it and the petals were so complicated I got a bit frustrated. I figured I would just skip the drawing part today and get on with the rendering of the coloured pencils. I went over everything with a really light layer of different colours just to get an idea of what the petals were going to look like, and also to make sure I didn't lose the really bright areas where the sun is shining through. I picked out all sorts of oranges, reds and yellows, plus a couple of darker browns. I used my stubby black pencil also to refine the edges, because some of it, you could see the blue kind of blurring into it, and I didn't want to have that. It worked out really well actually, using the black pencil just to outline around the petals as I went, and that merged in with the background really nicely. It had been a while since I've done a full coloured pencil piece, and I had forgotten just how long they take. It's really hard to see on this because I've had to speed the footage right up, but I recorded it in time-lapse and even that was 40 minutes long. The whole thing took me hours over many days, and I actually left this picture halfway done for about 3 weeks before I picked it up again. I'd done one flower and then I just had had enough, so I came back to it weeks later, which is a dangerous thing because the longer I leave something, the less likely I am to finish it. But I really wanted to finish this drawing, so just a couple of weeks ago, I made myself sit down and finish the entire thing in one sitting. It took me, I think, another 4 or 5 hours. I took a few breaks in between, of course, but I just worked until the whole thing was done. It's a surprisingly complicated picture because the petals overlap each other and there are areas where there are darker orangey bits and then there's really light areas where the sun is just fully shining through. Other areas are a deeper yellow, but I found that the yellow ochre worked perfectly for this as an underlayer, and then I added a brighter yellow over the top just to get that really saturated colour. It was right about here that I'd had a 3-week hiatus and then I came back to it, so I finished this entire flower in that one sitting. Oh, it took so long. It's so detailed and I did a lot of layers. This paper was fantastic. It's actually meant for calligraphy and writing, but because it has got a nice texture to it, it held the pencil really well. And I didn't use any solvent to blend the pencil in here. I just kept layering light layers of pencil on top of each other and then using heavier layers later on to burnish it and get rid of any of the white paper underneath. This was a very time-consuming but ultimately rewarding drawing. I'm really satisfied with the final result. I did spend a lot of time on it, and I think I was able to capture the light in this particular image really well. I'm not trying to boast or anything, I just feel really proud of this one. I certainly worked hard enough for it. The scanned picture actually looks really awesome. And I was pretty tired after that, so I just wanted to do something a little more fun and easy. I pulled out my collection of Sennelier inks and thought I might do something a little more inky and cartoony. I'm using some Caran drawing paper that's designed for illustration and manga, comics, things like that. I've actually used up most of this pad of paper, which is quite exciting, so here's me ripping out another piece and getting one step closer to actually using up an entire pad of paper. Here's one of my Blackwing pencils. This one is getting down to a little stub. I've used this one so much. I also have another box of them, but at least I'm getting through one pencil. And I did freehand this drawing. I saw this really cute photo of Easter Bunny figurines, and since this video is coming right out on Easter, I thought it would be a perfect one to finish this video on today. Mine is very much a cartoonish version of it, and I didn't have the background either. I found the picture on Isabey this time around. It's so completely different to the other two pictures, which were far more realistic. But sometimes I just like to have a bit of fun and try drawing some cutesy little characters. I stuffed this one up quite a few times before I was happy with the final drawing, and I just drew straight onto the Caran paper rather than drawing a draft copy first and then tracing it. I was way too lazy for that. I just wanted to draw, and I eventually came up with something that I was happy with. It took me quite a while to figure out Mr. Bunny's proportions because he's actually facing away and he's turned his head, and I couldn't quite get that for a bit, but once I got the shoulder in, it worked out. I tried to use some ink that's for cartooning, it bled and feathered into the paper, which was so annoying, so I switched over to a fountain pen with permanent ink in it, and this worked out so much better. But you can see poor Mrs. Bunny's ear is a bit messy up the top there. I did eventually fix this by going over it with dark colours. There's no way I was redrawing this, I just wanted to do this one particular picture, and Mr. Bunny has a little moustache, which I ended up drawing in, and a really creepy eyebrow. But anyway, let's ink it. I added a few drips of different colours of ink because I didn't have a brown, and so I mixed it up with a red, yellow and green, working up the layers from a lighter colour to a darker one because that ear on Mrs. Bunny is just a mess. Also, that first ink I used is not water resistant and it blurred in the places that I'd drawn it. I was so mad. Bad, never mind, I just went over it all anyway. The rest of the ink was fine from the fountain pen. And I quite like the brown that I was able to make with these three colours. I also realised here that I hadn't drawn Mr. Bunny's inner ear. Meh, no big deal. This is just a really casual artwork. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Or so I tell myself. I actually think this one turned out really cute. And I love these Sennelier inks, they're so beautifully transparent and vibrant. The brush I'm using is a little Japanese brush I found in Daiso. It's great, except this particular one keeps shedding hairs from the brush. It's so annoying. So I might end up tossing this one out and getting a new brush. The smaller one in the set was fine. And the palette I'm using in the shape of Australia is just a little dish that I found in an op shop somewhere for 50 cents, but it comes in really handy for small paintings. My bunnies are kind of floating in space a bit, so I just let the ink disperse from the picture rather than joining them to the bottom of the paper. I left the background pretty much empty, just added in a few hearts and other little things, painted in that Easter egg, and ended up with a cutesy Easter picture. Happy Easter, by the way, if you're celebrating it. And let me know in the comments which is your favourite artwork from today. Also, do you like me just making random artworks like this using different supplies from my studio? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Here we go, these are my two main artworks done in Schmincke Horadam Watercolors and Caran Luminance coloured pencils, and my third bonus painting with the inks, a little Easter one, totally different to the other two. There we go, I'll kind of squish them in. Anyway, I had fun painting and drawing these. It's just great to make art for the sake of making art, things that inspire me, and it's nice to be using some of my art supplies, though I don't think I'm ever going to get through them. I'm going to have to make a whole load more videos to do that. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'd like to click that subscribe button, I'm releasing videos every week, and you might want to check out these videos up here, which are previous ones, more artwork for you to look at. I'll see you all again really soon in my next video. Have a great day out there. Swatch you later. Bye!